The Dallas Mavericks, the Minnesota Timberwolves. For the Western Conference, it all comes down to this. Winner moves on to the NBA Finals. Welcome back, or welcome to America's Sports, the channel where we actually talk about the sport at hand rather than silly bullshit clickbaity topics. We're here to actually talk the game. If you're here for that other shit, this is probably not going to be for you. So let's get into it. We start off this wild west showdown with Minnesota as the series favorites. The first two games are in Minnesota. You can get the Minnesota Timberwolves at a minus 170, and you can get the Dallas Mavs for the series at a plus 145. Now for game one, the Minnesota is favored by 4.5 points with the over-under at 207.5. Now, first off, both these teams have been very impressive. You don't get to a Western Conference Finals without looking somewhat nice. Dallas winning their second and first round series in 6 games, winning 4 of the last 5 games against OKC, knocking off the number 1 seed in the West, the Thunder. As for Minnesota, they knocked off the defending champions of 2023. They did it in 7 games, and Game 7 they did in Denver. You know, just a few days ago, they were down 3-2 to Denver, and they come back and win the last 2 against Denver. Nothing but praise, nothing but respect for them. We know, of course, that Anthony Edwards is going to get his, and he did. He averaged over 27 points per game against Denver. But to me, the biggest X factor is how Karl Anthony Towns is going to play in a series from game to game, and you got to give him credit. He's answered the call. I think we saw just exactly how much Mike Conley and how much Naz Reid matters to the team. Also, Jaden McDaniels has been stellar the last 2 games. And of course, we know who the top 2 stars are in Dallas, but OKC did everything they could to keep it out of Kyrie's hands the most. In response, PJ Washington became their number 2 option against OKC. The guy, it felt like he never missed. Luka in particular did not start off the series shooting well, but by the time he got into his last 2 games, he caught fire, shooting over 56% from the field in the last 2 games. And he ended the series total with 39% shooting from 3. OKC's game plan was to get the ball out of Kyrie's hands as much as possible. And you would think, yeah, that makes sense. He's the veteran, he's a champion, but PJ Washington and then Derrick Jones in the last 2 games just absolutely crushed OKC because they were getting wide open threes and they were hitting them. I mean, that's what it came down to. Kyrie made the right pass. That happened a lot. But you can't let the others get off, as Shaq would say. And it's very true. If the stars are going to perform, but if your role players and such get going as well, you're going to win the series. And in the end, the team play is what matters. The top 5 scorers in points per game in the postseason are all out of the playoffs. Embiid, Brunson, Lillard, SGA, and Maxey, they're all out. And I think we saw a clear-cut case for Minnesota and Denver as well. Minnesota's second team and overall role players were just better than Denver's. Michael Porter Jr. was nowhere to be found in the last 2 to 3 games of the series. Naz Reid showed why he was 6th man of the year. He only averaged about 11 points per game for the series, but if you watch the game, you realize how big of an impact he actually had. I thought he was the best defender on Jokic by a country mile. Y'all can call this a hot take or whatever you want to call this. If I'm coach, I would have no problem with making Naz Reid the starter. And I don't just mean for a little bit. I don't just mean for a half, a game, or the series. I mean, I have no issues making Naz Reid our starter for the Minnesota Timberwolves from now on. Just a small example, in the game that Conley did not play in, the Timberwolves lost, and the game that they won in, and maybe their most impressive game of the series against Denver was Game 2 in Denver, where Gobert did not play. His improvement speaks volumes, and I think he's only going to keep getting better, guys. Give him more minutes. And then in Game 7, Jaden McDaniels was the big guy. Minnesota showed that Anthony Edwards could have an off game and still win. And you can do that against Denver. You can do that against anyone. Now, Dallas, since that trade to get Gafford and to get PJ Washington, have been so much better. So much better. And that's what I didn't take into account when predicting the series against OKC is how much better overall they got with those trades. To that point, I don't think the Mavs team before the trade deadline makes it to the Western Conference Finals this year. Ever since that trade deadline, they've been one of the hottest teams in the NBA besides Boston. And I think Minnesota being favored is right. It's what it should. We've seen in the Western Conference that the home court matters, but these teams have won on the road, and they've done really well on the road, actually. Minnesota, it speaks volumes to be able to go in there and win in Denver multiple times. So yeah, they should have no problem playing in Dallas on the road. And I think Minnesota can present a crazy amount of problems for Dallas, just like they have with everyone else. If I'm Minnesota, though, I'm not going to do what OKC did. I'm going to play you all straight up. Look, Kyrie was amazing in the first round against the Clippers, but if you give guys at this level wide open shots like Derrick Jones Jr. and like PJ Washington, you're going to get beat. Dallas also won't be able to bully Minnesota on the glass like they were able to do at OKC. SGA was their best rebounder. Edwards is going to be amazing. I don't know who they could really put on him to slow him down. They did not slow SGA down one bit, and they won't slow Edwards down either. And then the X factor, like usual, is Towns. Towns is a big man who can shoot threes and can take people off the dribble better than people realize. As to where Gafford and Lively, they can't really do that, and they can't really stick with Towns like that either. So you can put Gafford and Lively on Gobert, but who do you put on Towns? PJ Washington? I don't know about that. Not saying Dallas can't do this, though. They obviously can. But I think Minnesota Timberwolves are the Western Conference champions this year. It would take a monumental effort from Luka and Kyrie, and then the others are going to also have to make every shot they take like they did against OKC. Kyrie cannot average 15.7 against Minnesota and win. Therefore, I like Minnesota in Game 1, and I also like Minnesota for the series. I think Minnesota wins this in 6. This does not go 7. If you like the NBA and other sports like the NFL, consider subscribing today. We're locked in for the NBA playoffs, and the NFL is always in season. We're going to break down and preview all of the matchups, so stay tuned for more of America's Sports.